Welcome back to our multi-part retrospective. In this part 2, we leave Amsterdam and we start cruising down the west coast of Europe.
I still got the episode numbers in that corner over there. If you want to see more, go to our channel and find the links there. I will try to put the links still in that corner.
Hope you enjoy it.
Hope you enjoy.
20 July 2021, leaving the Netherlands. Many people asked what our plans were. We often said that we would go to IJmuiden and turn left. That is indeed heading south in the North Sea, which is exactly what we did. On our first night out, we sailed past Belgium into French waters. We originally thought to go to Dunkirk or Calais, but the weather was good and the sailing very relaxed, so we continued on towards Cherbourg. On the second night sailing towards Dieppe, the wind was slow, but enough to keep the sails full. However, the opposing current was stronger, and for the first time we were sailing backwards. But it was still beautiful with the bioluminescence. After 3 days and nights, we arrived at our first stop of Cherbourg, sailing 332 nautical miles. We stayed here for 2 rainy, stormy days. When the rain stopped and we had a decent weather window, we left Cherbourg for Carteret. It was the first time we saw dolphins next to our boat. During this trip, we experienced the Alderney race, where we had a new speed record of 12.5 knots. In Carteret, we met up with Jan and Monique of the Witte Walvis as the first cruisers from the Netherlands. We also had the first visit from friends from the Netherlands. We stayed for 6 days and moved on to Cameray-sur-Mer. The passage to Cameray-sur-Mer was a challenging one, with the wind coming precisely from the direction we wanted to go. This required us to tack between the Channel Islands of Jersey and Guernsey, making the 130 nautical mile passage to the Canal du Fort nearly 200 nautical miles. It was 2 days to get to Cameray-sur-Mer. We stayed here for 9 days on a mooring ball, also a first for us. We waited for a good weather window to cross the Bay of Biscay. We wanted to cross before the end of August. This is historically when the weather becomes generally worse. We thought we found one with a predicted 12 knots of wind most of the time. Very often the wind is blowing at least 5 knots harder than predicted. This would have made for an ideal crossing, but it was not to be. We had less wind than predicted and a big swell that caused the sails to bang back and forth. We ended up motoring for half of the way, 39 hours in total. But after 3 days, we made it safely across the notorious bay and dropped our anchor on the other side from A Coruña in Olieros, our first major multi-day, out-of-sight-of-land offshore passage. Achieving a major milestone, we decided to relax and enjoy our time on anchor here. Here we had our first beach party where we met a lot of sailors. We had our first salsa dancing workshop with Heron. We stayed here for 10 days in total, waiting for some wind to go further. Everybody on the anchor around us was also waiting for some wind, and about 10 boats left at the same time. The wind prediction was not very accurate, and much of the way we had no wind at all. Then we saw a thick fog bank coming closer. The wind shifted like 180 degrees and started blowing harder. We could finally sail on a close reach into the wind and in the fog. Very bizarre and rather spooky. Perhaps this is why it is called the Costa da Morte, or the Coast of Death. At the end of the day, we arrived in Rio de Camariñas and stayed there for 6 days. With the crews of 2 other boats, we organized a beach party. We invited everyone in the anchorage to come. We used our poiki for the first time while cruising. This was a big success. We moved on to the Ria de Arousa, first anchored for a week by an uninhabited island with some other boats, and had some parties there. We used our poiki for the second time. Later, we moved to a better protected spot on the north side of Isla de Arousa to shelter for a few days from some approaching bad weather. Time to move on, and we went south to Ria de Pontevedra, waiting for some northerly winds to move further south. Here we had our cheapest dinner. Along with our friends from Heron, we spent many hours collecting mussels, cleaning and cooking them. In the end, we were all sick for 4 days. However, there was also an amazing bioluminescence in this ria. The northerly trade wind, known as the Nortada, came and we moved on further south into Portugal. In one passage, we went all the way to Peniche, where Leontine's nephew and girlfriend were located in their camper van. We stayed here for 10 days and walked a lot. Dramatic scenery with waves crashing on the cliffs. The orcas were very active around this area and the subject of discussion among the sailors and fishermen. We see for the first time the destroyed rudders and hear many stories. We spent several days with Ricardo and Fana, and they decided to sail with us to Cascais. We spent more than 3 weeks on anchor here in Cascais. We took the train to Lisbon for a visit and celebrated some birthdays and had sundowners on the beach. The sailors' community was splitting up here. One group is going to the Canaries, and the other group is going to the Algarve and further into the Med. So we said goodbye, or until the next time, to some new dear friends who went the other direction. Our decision was to go for a year into the Mediterranean before crossing the big pond. With this in mind, we moved on to the Algarve. The water temperature and weather was already a lot better, so we spent much of the autumn and the entire winter in the Algarve. From Portimao and Ferragudo to Lagos and Alfor, back and forth on anchor for 1.5 months. Mid-December, we moved into the marina of Lagos because we had some visitors from the Netherlands. While here, we did some deck and paint repairs. We made a new mount for the outboard motor so it could be easily serviced on board. In the end of March, after 3.5 months, we left Lagos and sailed across the Gulf of Cadiz to Gibraltar. We dropped the hook in Palmones for a few days. The wind turned, and there will be a storm blowing from the east, so we moved to the other side of the bay and anchored in La Linea. It was blowing 40-plus knots from the east with a swell of 2 meters out of the west. We were surfing on the waves, and our dinghy flipped with the outboard motor on. We went into the marina to fix the outboard engine. After a week of waiting for some better weather, we moved further east to Motril, Cabo de Gata, and Aguilas. In Aguilas, we spent a week on anchor. We had the whole bay to ourselves, our own little paradise. When a motorboat came floating by with burned batteries, we threw him a line and saved them from ending up on the rocks, until a friend of his came and gave him a tow back to port. As usual, we waited for some wind to move further east, and then north. When it came, we made stops in La Azoya and Punta de la Cala, close to Alicante. The weather prediction is almost never right in the Mediterranean. Never from the right direction, no wind or too much wind. We were trying to get to Moraya, but we were beating into 25 knots of wind when it turned more north. We now had a nice course towards Ibiza, so we decided to go in that direction. Of course, the wind died halfway, so we motored the rest of the way to Ibiza and dropped our hook in Poroig. We stayed there for a week and did some maintenance on the engine and canvas. Our first experience with anchoring in and around Posidonia. Then we motored to Formentera and ended up on a rolly anchorage in La Sabina, with ferries passing by at high speed. Here we lost our new outside shower overboard. The next day we went around the corner and dropped our hook in the nice blue swimming pool of Cala Saona. We wanted to make a nice time-lapse of the sunset and went to shore. This time we flipped our dinghy for the second time, now packed with table, chairs, drinks, cameras, and ourselves. Luckily, we were able to find everything back. After spending a week here fixing the outboard engine again and some exploring, we went back to Ibiza. We first went to San Antonio for some shopping, washing, and filling the diesel tank. Then we moved on to Beniras, where we enjoyed the sound of many bongos when the sun was setting. The day after, we moved to Portinax and ended up in another beautiful swimming pool, but a rather close anchorage. We had some wind the next day, and we used it to sail to Mallorca. We stayed over 2 weeks in the Bay of Palma and sailed back and forth between El Arenal, Torre Nova, Platja Magalluf, and Portavels. Leontine's sisters enjoyed a week with us sailing. One paddleboard was stolen after a nice beach barbecue. After the sisters left, we moved further to the east side of Majorca, anchored by Campos, Cala Mondrago, Porto Colom, and Cala Malto. The next island was Menorca. We went first to Fontanillas, Cala Tirant, and ended up in the nice protected bay of Fornells. We felt at home here and stayed for 3.5 weeks. It is midsummer and temperatures went up, so we slowed down and took air-conditioned buses to visit the bigger cities. We also had an encounter when a motorboat dragged anchor and ended up hooked on our anchor chain early one morning. We secured the boat alongside until the owners came to get it. We had some deep scratches on our boat, but they had good insurance, very friendly people, and happy that we saved their boat. They brought us many local goodies from Menorca. From Menorca, we went to Sardinia in 3 days and 5 hours. During the nights, the wind died completely, so we decided to drift and catch some sleep. We arrived in Sardinia at Isola Piana and by Pelosa, a big blue swimming pool. Later, we moved further to Porto Torres and then on to Vignola Mare. We crossed over to Corsica, to Plage de Balistra, to pick up some spare membranes for the water maker from our friends on Formidable. We stayed there about a week. Back to Sardinia, where we hopped along the east coast in 2 weeks from Porto Pudo, Canigione, Golfo Aranci, Olbia, San Paolo, Capoferrato, often using the engine in the Mediterranean. From Capoferrato, we sailed in 6 days and 10 hours back to mainland Spain. We tried to sail it all the way, but in the end we used our engine for almost 22 hours. We finished in La Azoya next to our friends and fellow YouTubers Cordelia. We are going to get hauled out in Motril for some maintenance and paint jobs. Cordelia was also going there for the same reason. So we sailed together along the coast and had a 5-day stop in Roquetas del Mar. We were every day on our anchor the entire time we spent in the Mediterranean. Marinas are just not an affordable option. We got hauled out at the Marina Motril. During our time on the Hard, our work included replacing the cutlass bearing and prop shaft, getting the leaky muffler welded, a good maintenance on the engine, and raising the waterline and making some copper coat repairs. We also went back to the Netherlands for 2 weeks for a wedding and to visit with family and friends. We came back to Motril with a spare autopilot. We installed it to see if this would be a good working reserve. Afterwards, we spent a few weeks in the water at the Marina Motril, waiting for a good weather window to go towards Madeira. The weather window didn't come, so we stayed through the Christmas holidays and became the night marineros. Good way to know all the visitors and make a lot of new friends. A few days before Christmas, a fire broke out on our neighbor's boat. New Year, new adventures. We left Motril on the 5th of January to go to Madeira, or at least that was the plan. On the way to Gibraltar, the spare autopilot didn't work correctly. The wind meter was broke, and the new shaft became very hot while the engine was running. We sailed all the way to La Linea, steering by hand, with some flags tied to the railing as wind indicators. We dropped our hook in the Bay of Gibraltar, and the next day we moved into a berth at the Marina Alcadeza to get all things fixed before we move on. In short, 3.5 months later, we installed a new autopilot we bought in Gibraltar, pulled a new cable for the wind meter, and some other small repairs. We went out of the harbor and sailed around the bay to see if everything was working. We sailed around the Bay of Gibraltar for almost a month, waiting for some winds to blow us towards Madeira while the orcas are active in the Straits of Gibraltar, destroying a lot of rudders and even sink a boat around the corner. On May 18th, we leave and head towards Porto Santo. After 5 days and 3 hours, we drop our anchor. The plan was to stay here for 1 week. We liked this island a lot and decided not to make plans anymore, because that doesn't work for us. We now have some ideas. We go slow. When we like it somewhere, we stay. If we start itching, we sail further. No hurry. We are almost a year here on this little island, and we have seen almost all the seasons, festivals, and happenings. We've met a lot of people, making lots of new friends. Do we miss our previous life? Our jobs? Working? No. Living on a boat is also work. Everything is breaking, and repairs are not so easy and quite time-consuming. We have to be our own carpenter, painter, plumber, electrician, mechanic, IT, planner, doctor, videographer, cook, fisherman, diver, cleaner, sailmaker, designer, etc. We meet a lot of sailors, and we learn a lot about each other's specialties. We help each other with all kinds of jobs. That is the best part of our life now, helping other people. What we do miss is family and dear friends. Sometimes it's hard to be so far away, and you or they need a real hug. We meet a lot of people who become new friends, and we call them our family. But everyone is at some point going their own way, and most of them are moving on. The hardest part is saying goodbye or farewell. That is why we say, until the next time. We will meet again somewhere, sometime. Some interesting statistics. Since we left the Netherlands, we have sailed 4,512 nautical miles. That's 8,356 kilometers. We've run the engine for 367 hours, used 1,330 liters of diesel, and 157 liters of gasoline. Hope you fucking like it. Jesus Christ, this was a pain in the ass.